Standing outside the community center, my hands shaking, I gripped the small wooden keychain in my pocket, its edges smoothed by years of anxious fidgeting. Within my cousin Tessa was enticing a group of investors, with her honey-smooth voice pitching my project as though it were her own. She assumed that, as usual, I would keep quiet and swallow my pride in order to maintain harmony among the family. But I wasn't going to be the doormat tonight. I would go through that door tonight and reclaim what was rightfully mine, not with cries or tears, but with a strategy so incisive that it would sever her lies like a razor. Let me take you back to how I got here, to the point at which the betrayal of my family drove me to the brink and made me discover a power I was unaware I possessed. I'm Clara Monroe, a 34-year-old landscape architect in a small Maine seaside town. I dedicated years to creating my own project, a little workshop where I create communally uplifting gardens. However, my family, my golden child cousin Tessa, was at the forefront of their attempt to take advantage of my hard-earned space. It all fell apart on a cool Saturday morning in the early spring. Anticipating a peaceful day to draw designs for a new community park, I had traveled to my studio, a converted barn with a view of the bay. Instead, I saw Tessa's svelte SUV parked in front of my hardwood flooring, her high-end shoes clicking as she guided customers inside. "Thank you for visiting my creative hub," she declared, pointing to my mood boards, drafting table and life's work as though she had constructed everything herself. My stomach turned over. She had not inquired at all. She had recently taken over using my studio as if it were an Airbnb that she might use to book for her real estate business. As she spun falsehoods about her plan to build a posh condo complex that would demolish the park I was battling to preserve, I stood motionless in the doorway, gasping for air. Not a single one of my relatives, including my dad, aunt, and even uncle, glanced at me as they nodded along, smiling with delight at Tessa's success. None of them asked why they were using my area without permission. The cold wind off the harbour was not as painful as the treachery. This was more than a company or a barn. It was about giving up my voice to keep everyone else comfortable and being invisible for years. I could have barged in and told them to get out, but I knew Tessa. My family would love it when she twisted it and made me look like the self-centered one. So with my heart racing, I snuck away and drove to the boardwalk, where the sound of the waves drowned out the confusion in my mind. I took out the keychain, which was a present from my late grandmother, and had the words "Grow Your Own Way" engraved on it. It was fashioned like a little garden trowel, and I was sitting on a worn bench. Before my family taught me to shrink myself, it was the one thing that made me remember who I was. A fire ignited inside me as I traced the words. I refused to let Tessa ruin my dream. I would respond with something more intelligent, something they wouldn't anticipate, rather than with their drama. I began making plans that evening. Unbeknownst to me at the time, I was going to learn a secret that would alter everything and demonstrate the extent to which Tessa would go in order to destroy me. You'll understand why this was so painful if you've ever had your family treat your limits as though they were optional. And you'll understand why I couldn't back down if you've ever stood up to the ones you care about the most. This is the tale of how, one cautious step at a time, I regained my life and discovered that sometimes saying no is the most effective thing you can do. In retrospect, I can understand how I got here, and how the trap I was in was created by years of keeping my head down and my heart open for my family. During my childhood, in our small Maine town, I was the child who always stepped aside to let others take center stage. Tessa, my cousin. We all revolved around her, like the sun. Bold, charismatic, and capable of making you appreciate her for selling ice to a penguin. Me, I was the one who kept everything under control, fixed problems, and cleaned up messes that no one else wanted to handle. Because that's what love meant in our family, or at least that's what I was taught. I did it in silence. When I first learned to sacrifice my pride for Tessa, I was 10 years old. For the town's summer fair, a competition for children to showcase their inventiveness, we had spent weeks constructing a model lighthouse. While Tessa largely drew ideas and smiled to win over the judges, I sat up late gluing small shingles and painted the stripes just so. She snatched the ribbon, held it up, and declared to everyone that it was her idea when we took first place. I felt like a ghost as I stood there clutching the lighthouse while my aunt smiled and my dad applauded. Later at the ice cream booth at the fair, my mother gave me a shoulder squeeze and said, "Clara, let Tessa have her turn." I nodded, but I sensed something cracking inside. "You're strong enough to share." I recognized for the first time then that my job was useless unless it was helping someone else. It wasn't much different in high school. Tessa darted between art classes and parties, always rescued by her mother's credit card, while I worked 2 jobs mornings at the cafe and evenings at the library to save money for college. My dad said, "That's practical Clara," when I was accepted to a state institution on a half scholarship for environmental design. Good for you. Realistic, as if I were a sensible pair of shoes. My aunt hosted a rebranding party for Tessa's new entrepreneurial journey after she dropped out of her 3rd college program, and I drove 3 hours from campus to attend, only to spend the night refilling punch bowls as Tessa presented her nebulous business ideas to family acquaintances. My studies were not questioned. I felt so invisible that no one noticed that I had later cried in the dark on a red-eye bus on my way back to school. Each sacrifice piled up like stones in my chest as the process continued to recur. I defied that obscurity when I launched my landscape architecture firm at the age of 27. I acquired that old barn near the port, saved every last penny, and converted it into a studio where I could create gardens that gave people a sense of vitality. Every community project I proposed and every plant I drew was a bit of me, asserting my presence in a world that seldom ever acknowledged me. On my desk, a wooden keychain that my grandmother had given me engraved with the words "Grow your own way" and shaped like a little garden trowel served as a silent reminder that this was mine. I wish I had listened to her sooner. She had given it to me the day I signed the lease, her eyes sparkling as she whispered, "Don't let anyone dig up your roots, Clara." However, family tends to reappear, doesn't it? After her most recent unsuccessful business endeavor, a store that flopped because Tessa spent more time on Instagram than on inventory, she relocated to Portland. I would listen to her when she called me late at night to vent about how unfair life was, send her gift cards for coffee, and even drive up to help her pack when she was evicted. Her difficulties were seen by my parents and aunt as evidence of her big dreams, but my steady growth was simply anticipated. They would reply, "Clara is fine," as if I were a machine that didn't require care. My family came together in support of Tessa when she returned to town last year and announced she was switching to real estate, so I wasn't shocked. Their quick assumption that my studio was included in the package surprised me. It began modestly. Tessa claimed her apartment was too small and asked to borrow my studio for a client meeting. I replied in the affirmative since I always did that. She left coffee cups on my drawing table while she stored her files in my cupboards after one meeting turned into 3. My parents dismissed it. "Clara, she's just getting started." As if her shadow had been a gift, my aunt went one step farther and said that I owed Tessa for inspiring me as a child. On certain mornings, when I arrived at my studio, I would see Tessa's business cards strewn all over my desk, her perfume clinging to my desk as if she were claiming her space. I would always clean up after myself, bite my tongue, and assure myself that it was only temporary. I did not wish to be the villain. I didn't want to hear my dad preach about family loyalty or hear my mom sigh in disappointment. In actuality, though I wasn't okay, Gasping for oxygen in the one area that should have been mine, I was drowning in their expectations. My studio was more than simply a barn. It was my haven and evidence that I could construct anything without anyone's consent. My family was supporting Tessa as she dealt with it piece by piece. At night, I would lie awake and gaze at the ceiling, wondering why I had allowed this to continue. Why, despite my entire being screaming no, did I continue saying yes? It was oppressive to feel guilty for wanting to keep my place safe, for being resentful of Tessa, and for not being the obliging daughter they had wanted me to be. But something else was rising behind that remorse, a tiny but persistent glimmer of rage that told me I deserved more. The morning I discovered Tessa in my studio with her clients behaving as though she owned the space that Spark grew. The way my family stood there, complicit, expecting me to roll over, as usual, was just as bad as the invasion. I knew I couldn't keep sacrificing myself to please them, so I clutched my keys as I drove to the beachfront that day. I had done enough. I would lose myself in addition to my studio if I didn't take action right away. However, I was also aware that I couldn't simply face them. My family would band together, Tessa would spin it, and I would be the bad guy. I required evidence, a means of revealing what was taking place, without stepping into their trap. And I would soon discover just that, a secret that would completely alter my life, and that Tessa never intended for me to see. It was as if the fog over the port cleared, and I realized my family for who they truly were when I discovered the email. For years I had persuaded myself that their lack of consideration was simply carelessness rather than malicious intent. However, as I sat at my kitchen table that evening and gazed at my laptop screen, I came to the realization that Tessa wasn't merely stealing my studio. Rather, she was attempting to completely erase me. It was quite painful to see the proof in black and white. But rather than sobbing or confronting her, I shut down my computer, put my grandmother's keychain in my pocket, and began to reflect. Now was not the moment to blow up. It was time to make plans. It began a few days after I witnessed Tessa strutting around my studio with clients as if it were her own showroom. Still in shock, I was trying to think of a way to stop her without starting a family feud. My lifeline had been my best friend Lila, who owns the flower store next door. Her eyes were flaming as she leaned over the table at the seafront cafe while enjoying coffee. "They're stomping all over you, Clara. Tessa is grabbing your space, not just using it." Her comments resonated with me like a seed taking root. You have to push back, but smart, not loud. Although I was aware that she was correct, I required something tangible that Tessa couldn't avoid. I simply didn't think it would land in my lap so quickly. I was cleaning up in my studio on Tuesday night, after Tessa's most recent meeting, and her files were still strewn all over my drafting table, her jasmine aroma hanging in the air like an unwanted visitor. My phone rang with a fresh email while I was stacking her papers. Who sent it, Tessa? My heart skipped a beat when I saw the subject line, Investor Pitch Deck Final. I had never before been copied on something of this nature. I opened it out of curiosity, thinking perhaps she had finally incorporated me into her plans. Rather, what I discovered chilled my blood. We have similar email names, Clara, M, and Tessa. So she unintentionally sent me the email that was intended for her business partner, a slick real estate tycoon named Gavin. A well-prepared presentation with glossy graphics of a posh condo building she was promoting to investors was attached. The patterns, all of the native wildflower beds and garden path curves that I had drawn for the community park project that I had been working on for months, were mine. She had put her logo on them, changed the name of my work to Clara Monroe Designs, and claimed in her profile that she had been innovating sustainable landscapes for years without mentioning me by name. No credit, no footnote, nothing. It wasn't the worst part, though. A mistakenly forwarded communication from Tessa to Gavin got buried in the email stream. She wrote, "Clara's designs are the hook." She lacks the courage to oppose us on this. I'll phase her out once we have the investors locked in. She won't ever understand what hit her, and the park is done for." I read it 3 times with each word cutting more deeply. In addition to utilizing my studio, Tessa was going to cut me off entirely and was stealing my work to further a proposal that would demolish the park I had put so much effort into. What about my family? They supported her, while keeping me in the dark, so they were involved in it, or at least in on it. The keychain was digging into my palm as I sat there with trembling hands. The park was a personal place, not merely a place of employment. I had listened to children and grandparents discuss the significance of that green space over months of meetings with the town council. There I had spread my grandmother's ashes and made a self-promise to create something enduring. Tessa was aware of that. She had witnessed my tears at the memorial. She was now placing a wager on my silence on the Clara, who usually took a back seat. The betrayal was not only professional, it was a stab to the core of all I had worked so hard to achieve. I could have contacted her at that very moment, yelled at her about the email, and told her to stop. I had played that game before, though, and every time I faced my family head-on, I ended up apologizing and felt like the bad person for having feelings. Not now. I grabbed screenshots logged out and forwarded the email to a private folder. My heart was steady, but my thoughts were racing. Tessa believed she understood me, but she was mistaken. I wasn't the Clara who had permitted her to accept the family's kudos and the lighthouse ribbon. I had had enough of being a doormat. I called Lila the following morning and showed her the email when we were having breakfast at her shop. She nearly smashed her coffee mug when she slammed it down. She is a vulture, not simply a robber. Clara, you have her completely correct. What is the play about? While I didn't yet have all the answers, I was certain that I needed to safeguard my studio and my work so Tessa couldn't manipulate the story. I got to work investigating the condo project, the investors, and the zoning regulations of the town. Keeping my cards close, I contacted Elliot, the director of the community centre, who had expressed excitement about my park plans, and asked him ambiguous questions on Tessa's pitch. He said the condo transaction would be debated at a town hall meeting in 2 weeks. My window was that one. With the keychain resting on my desk, I would spend every evening in my studio planning out my next move. I kept it a secret from my aunt and parents, who as usual would support Tessa. However, I confided in my grandma's brother, Uncle Marcus, a retired park ranger who understood the drama and had always been the odd one out in our family. He folded his aged hands and listened quietly over lunch at the cafe. "Clara, you're right to stand up for what's rightfully yours, but use your intellect, not your emotions to fight. Tessa is relying on your response." A plan that was beginning to take shape, one that would reveal Tessa's lies without a single raised voice, was pointed out to me by his words, which were like a compass. I arrived at the studio as usual and nodded when Tessa walked in with her clients. She was unaware that I had viewed the email or that I was assembling evidence. I was burdened by her betrayal every day, but I was also becoming more and more clear-headed. This was about protecting myself from a family that had taught me that my needs were unimportant, not only about protecting my studio or my ideas. My opportunity to reverse the situation was approaching with the municipal hall. Tessa believed she had triumphed. She was going to find out how mistaken she was. It was like standing on the precipice of a cliff, with the wind howling and taunting me to leap on the night of the town hall. I had spent 2 weeks getting ready, practicing every phrase and every motion. Tessa believed she had me beat, assuming I would keep quiet, while she demolished the park I cherished and marketed my plans as her own. However, she had misjudged me. My grandmother's keychain was in my pocket as I stood outside the community centre, and I wasn't the Clara who had been swallowing her pride for years. I was prepared to reclaim my life not via conflict, but with an unmistakable truth that would illuminate the room like a beacon during a storm. The days that followed discovering Tessa's email were a haze of silent labor. I had backed up my initial park ideas, saved the screenshots, and kept track of every sketch I had created for the project. My friend Lila, a florist, served as my sounding board and kept me grounded with her frank advice. She had sliced through a bunch of daisies and smiled, saying, "Don't let her see you coming." Over coffee at the cafe, Uncle Marcus had nodded wisely, saying, "Hit her where it hurts her reputation. Clara, show the town who you are." Their words encouraged me as I prepared my move, contacting Elliot, the director of the community center, to reserve a time slot to speak at the town hall. Not with anger, but with what you've built. I haven't yet informed him about Tessa's email. Keeping my cards close, I presented it as providing updates on the park project. Meanwhile, Tessa was having a great time, acting as though she owned the studio. She had been visiting it with clients and sizing up investors. With my aunt raving about her vision, and my parents emailing me about how proud they were of Tessa's big deal, my family was right behind her. They never brought up my job or inquired as to why Tessa was occupying my space. Even though every message hurt, I didn't reply. I nodded when my mother called, and I grinned when Tessa walked in. Let them believe that I was still Clara, always willing to back off. They were unaware that I was about to change the course of events. Locals, including fishermen, store owners, and students from the high school environmental club, filled the town hall, which was crowded. Tessa was in the front, making her condo pitch, with her fitted blazer and her dazzling grin. With a confident voice, she referred to my designs as my sustainable vision, as she displayed them on the screen. Sitting in the second row, my parents applauded as if she had solved the world's hunger. I clutched the keychain so tightly that it left scratches on my palm as I stood in the back, my heart racing. I could have intervened and confronted her directly, but she was expecting that. I chose to wait instead. After Tessa was done, Elliot introduced me. Our local landscape architect, Clara Monroe, has an update on the community park project. Tessa's head jerked up, and her smile momentarily faltered. With my laptop ready and my voice calm, I made my way to the stage. I looked around the room and said, "Thank you, Elliot." I clicked to my first slide, which featured my own sketches time-stamped and signed shining on the computer instead of Tessa's pilfered renderings. I've been working on the park for months, designing a space for our kids, our families, and our memories. As I went over the designs, the room leaned in as I described the accessible pathways, the native flora, and the bench where I had scattered my grandmother's ashes. Tessa was not mentioned. I didn't have to. The audience witnessed the truth my heart and my effort exposed. The twist then appeared. I paused and remarked, "Some of you may have seen these designs elsewhere. A condo development that would take the place of our park is being proposed, but I'm here to tell you that the park is here to stay. To make it happen, I've teamed up with Elliot to start a community fundraiser and am providing my drawings to the town pro gratis." Cheers, applause, and children holding handcrafted Save the Park placards filled the room. Her clients were chattering frantically next to Tessa as her face became white. Instead of challenging her, I would just undercut her entire presentation by providing the community with something superior. My aunt was restless in her chair, and my parents were perplexed. I continued by revealing a website I had created with Lila's assistance, complete with links for donations and my initial goals. The investors' enthusiasm in Tessa's condos was waning by the time I resigned, and some of them were taking out their phones and leaving. Tessa stammered about collaborations and miscommunications in an attempt to recover, but the harm was already done. She was perceived by the village as a thief who had attempted to make money off of the labor of others. With their applause long since gone, my family sat still. I kept my eyes off of them. I was no longer in need of their approval. Elliot looked at me as I walked away from the podium and gave me a nod that was quite clear. In the rear, Lila was beaming, as if she had won the lottery. As I went by, she murmured, "You got it perfect." The water glistened under the stars as I drove to my studio that evening. Although Tessa's files were still present, they seemed to be artifacts from a conflict I had already resolved. With the facts out there for everyone to see, rather than a lawsuit or a yelling fight, I had reclaimed my voice, my work, and my space. I hadn't even had to show the email, which was my secret weapon. My justice was the park's future, the town's backing, and my own clarity. My family's silence was more powerful than their applause. Tessa's bargain was dead, and her reputation was damaged. The battle was far from done, though. My phone was already ringing with texts about my dad's requests for an explanation and my mom's guilt trips. Ignoring them, I put the keychain on my desk and let the moonlight catch its little trowel. Although I had won this round, I understood that the real test was ahead, confronting my family, establishing firm boundaries, and creating a life free from the need to prove myself. I felt prepared for the first time. In that packed room, I had discovered my strength and I wasn't going to let it go. I woke up to a silence I hadn't experienced in years the morning after the town meeting. Tessa's falsehoods had come to light in front of everyone. The park project was thriving, and my studio was once again mine. However, I realized that the most difficult part was still to come. As I stood in my kitchen, drinking coffee, and tracing the words, "Grow your own way," on my grandmother's keychain. Regaining my personal space was one thing, but regaining my position in my family, or deciding to leave, was quite another. I'd lived my entire life caving into their demands, but now that I knew the truth, I was prepared to maintain my ground. This was not an act of retaliation. It was about creating a life in which I didn't have to go smaller in order to fit in. The fallout was swift. "We didn't know Tessa was using your work, Clara." My mother texted me her words, a mixture of evasion and guilt. "What kept you from telling us Tessa sent a single message?" "I didn't mean for it to go this far." My dad's voicemail was harsher, requesting a family gathering to clear up this mess. "Can we have a conversation?" I left them unanswered, because I wanted time to reflect, not because I was spiteful. Ever my pillar of support, Lila stopped by with muffins and a sobering reminder. She tossed her hair over her shoulder and remarked, "They're rushing because you showed them up." A later call from Uncle Marcus said, "Don't let them guilt you into backing down." His voice was steady. "You did well, youngster. Now choose what you want from them, not what they want from you." Their encouragement helped me realize that I would meet my family, but only if I wanted to. I decided to hold the meeting at the Boardwalk Cafe, which is a neutral space with the waves of the bay in the background. With a keychain in my pocket, I came early and chose a table beneath the awning, the springtime air smelling of lilacs and salt. My parents were the first to arrive, with my dad's arms crossed, as if he were preparing for a discussion, and my mom's face tense with anxiety. Tessa arrived last, her customary polish gone, her eyes rimmed with red and her fidgeting nervously. At first there was stillness weighed down by what we hadn't discussed in years. My father's tone was clipped when he broke it. "You made Tessa look bad in front of the entire community, Clara. We are related. You ought to have handled this in private." I steadied myself and took a breath. I said, my voice calm, "I tried handling things privately my whole life. I cleaned up Tessa's mess. I allowed her to use my studio, and I kept silent when you all complimented her on my efforts. However, it wasn't a private error when she intended to demolish the park after stealing my plans. A betrayal it was." My mother's fingers flitted to her chest. I shook my head when she continued, "We didn't know she took your work." "You didn't inquire," I remarked, "because I've always given in. You thought my time, my studio, and my dreams were up for grabs." With a little voice, Tessa looked down and said, "That stops now." "Clara, I didn't believe you would care this much." Her remark struck me hard. Not because they were accurate, but rather because they revealed how profoundly my family had misinterpreted me. I cared every time, I muttered. You're always so okay with everything. I simply didn't know how to express it without upsetting everyone. At that point, the discussion became unfiltered and untidy. My mother acknowledged that they had relied on me since I was the strong one, not realizing I needed help. My dad, who is tough but kind, stated they were mistaken to believe Tessa had my approval. After years of disappointments, Tessa apologetically acknowledged that she had been determined to prove herself. I did not absolve them, but I did listen. Rather, I established my limits, no more occupying my personal space, no more assuming I had time, and no more expecting me to solve their issues. I said, I love you, but I can't continue to sacrifice everything for you. Being respectful is the first step towards becoming a family. Perhaps because the town hall had demonstrated to them that I wasn't bluffing, they didn't argue. My mum called to check in, not to make demands, and we left with hesitant promises to try things out, like lunch with Tessa in a few weeks. I felt lighter but not naive as I drove back to my studio holding the warm keychain. It wouldn't be easy to change, and if they couldn't meet me halfway, I was fine with being apart. In the months that followed, I found healing in the world I created around myself, not in my family. Thanks to funding and donations from the community that Elliot helped me obtain, the park project got off. I began mentoring young people in the area, teaching them how to create gardens and advocate for their beliefs. With string lights flashing and children running through my wild flower beds, Lila and I threw a spring carnival at the community centre. Uncle Marcus arrived with a look of pride that was more valuable than any family cheer. Once more, my studio served as a gathering place for those who appreciated my work, rather than Tessa's plots. Tessa no longer assumed my forgiveness and texted me periodically with updates after finding a new apartment and a position with a smaller real estate company. As if they were discovering me for the first time, my parents called more and asked thoughtful questions. For now, it's enough that we're trying. Even though we're not perfect, I no longer require their approval. The first flower in the park, the teenagers who draw next to me, and the peaceful mornings when I unlock my studio and realize it is mine, are all places where I have found it. One evening, while driving down the waterfront with the keychain on my dashboard, I came to the realization that neither protecting the park nor exposing Tessa was the greatest victory. It involved learning to say no out of respect for myself, not to offend others. You understand the weight of the battle if you have ever had to defend your position in a family that didn't notice you. However, you are also aware of the liberation that results from ceasing to betray oneself in order to maintain harmony. I once believed that love required sacrifice. I now understand that it entails allowing yourself to develop in your own way, even if it's challenging, particularly at that time. Tell me then, have you ever had to make a decision involving the people you care about the most? If this resonated with you, please subscribe for more. Share your story below. The roughest soil can occasionally produce the strongest roots.